Bienvenidas, bienvenidos a esta edición especial de Animac 25 aniversario. I switch to English now. Welcome to everyone to this very special edition of Animac 25th anniversary. The moment has arrived to a very, very special moment. Here we are at ECIB School, the School of Cinema of Barcelona, which have been our partners for a few years now of Animac. Very happy to be able to introduce you an amazing artist, an amazing director. He's been a key figure of the great Pixar animation studios, no more or less than the director of Coco and Toy Story 3, both films winning 2 Oscars, each one. Not only that, over the 25 years that he was at Pixar Animation Studios, he was involved in a number of creative tasks, including also the co-direction of 3 amazing films, Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., and Looking for Nemo. He arrived to the studio back in '94, and his first job, because he comes from an editing background in live action, actually, his first job was editing the amazing film that it's a stepping stone to all of us, which is Toy Story 1. So as you are now here in a school, he also went to college. He went to USC, to the University of Southern California, studying cinema and television, and he went back 20 years later to receive the Mary Pickford Award, a very important award given to the alumni that have contributed to the cinema arts. Please welcome to the one and only, the amazing Unkrich.
Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here, and I hope you can learn a thing or two today.
I'm sure. We're really excited to have you here with us. We're all admirers of your work. And our students are looking forward to asking lots of questions, so we better start. And we can begin with Diego Salazar. He's speaking on behalf of the first-year students. Hello, Diego. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. So we'd love to know how you became a director of animation movies. What were your plans when you started out studying, and how did they change through your career, like, if they did?
Sure. As it was mentioned, I went to film school at the University of Southern California. I had no intention of going into animation. I had nothing against animation, but it just wasn't my passion. I actually wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I think, like a lot of students becoming film students, I wanted to write and direct. But once I was at school, I started to discover that there were certain aspects of filmmaking that I was drawn to, like editing and directing, and other areas that I maybe felt like I didn't have the skills or the passion for. So I ended up really focusing primarily on editing while I was at film school, although I did do a bunch of directing as well. And my first work out of school was as an editor. So that's how I was working professionally, and that is what brought me to Pixar Animation Studios in the first place, was as a film editor. And it was only after being at the studio and working on Toy Story and becoming a central part of the core team that I fell in love with animation, and specifically the kind of animation we were doing at Pixar. And 25 years later, I was still there making movies. It wasn't anything that I had planned, and I suppose that's a good lesson that you don't always get what you're going for, what you're striving for, but you have to keep your mind open to other opportunities that might come along, because they may take your life in a new direction that's even better than anything you ever imagined.
Thank you. Now we'll go with the second-year students, and Li Guang is asking on behalf of them.
Hello, we
Hi.
are students from second year of animation, and we would like to know that for you, while you're producing a film, what are the most important factors to make a film alive and memorable?
Well, speaking specifically about the films that I made while I was at Pixar, when trying to decide what the subject matter should be for a new film, there are a number of things that I kind of kick around in my mind. First and foremost, I'm always looking for the potential for emotion in the story that we're telling. And beyond that, we try to specifically tell stories that could only be told using animation. We don't want to just make a film that could have just as easily be made using live action. For me personally, I like to try to find stories that have the potential to have a full range of emotions and experiences in the course of the film, because those are the kinds of films I like to watch myself. So I like a film that has true, deep emotion. I like films that are funny. I like films that are a little scary sometimes or tense. Not necessarily having a lesson or anything to teach the audience, though those things tend to emerge as you're making the film. And even if they weren't things that you were planning on including or exploring when you set out on the project. So yeah. And then beyond that, kind of like some obvious things like, is this an original idea? Is there anything like this? And if there is, what is your particular take on this subject matter? Or how are these characters in your story unique and something that hasn't been seen before? Because, embarking on creating any project, whether it's a short or a feature-length film or a miniseries or anything, it's a ton of work, and you don't want to go into that project knowing that you're already not necessarily copying, but that you're kind of retreading ground that's been covered before by other filmmakers. You want to find something that's unique to you and feels original. And so that's always a very, very important thing for me. So at the end of the day, unique characters, a unique world that audiences hopefully haven't seen before, and couple that with good story full of emotion and humor and heart, and maybe a little scary too. Those are all the ingredients for me anyway.
I see, and I'm also curious about when you come up with an idea, you get an idea first, like, oh, I want to make a film. So you're looking for what it's about, or you just like something pops out, like pass by you, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna make something out of it. For example, with Coco, the film, how did you come up with the idea, like producing such a nice film, such a big project with Mexican cultural background, and especially about the Dia de los Muertos?
Well, you can come at stories lots of different ways. It's not always the same. In the case of Coco, I had long been fascinated by the Mexican celebration of Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. And I also had a strong affinity for Mexico and for Mexican culture. I had visited a number of times promoting the other films that I'd made. So that was really where the genesis came. I didn't initially set out to tell the specific story that we ended up telling. It was really more of a broad idea of telling a story set against Dia de Muertos. And I did know that I wanted a character to travel to the land of the dead, such as it might be. It was really also vague in my mind at that point. And it was only with the journey of making the film that we ultimately arrived at the story in the finished film. It went through a lot of twists and turns on the way there. We started off with a very different story than what we ended up making. But that's just part of the process. And that's also part of why I've loved working at Pixar for so many years, because they're very supportive of taking the time that they know it takes to tell a good story, and that sometimes it can take years to develop and hone and shape a story before it's a film that's worthy of being made.
Thank you. Now, Alejandro has a question on behalf of the CV students.
Yes, hello. Our question is, as director or co-director, did your work become too difficult at some point? In a way, you have to go for a different approach or different. You have to change everything. You have to change anything totally in a moment of production.
Yes, that happens all the time. You know, it happens in bigger ways earlier on in the project, and in smaller ways the deeper you get into it. But again, to circle back to what I was just talking about with Coco, when we first were developing what became Coco, it was originally a story about a boy, an American boy, who travels to Mexico to visit family that he has there that he's never really known. And he's also, in that story, he was grappling with the death of his mother that had happened, before the story began. And his father was taking him down to Mexico to experience Dia de Muertos, hoping that it would maybe help him cope with the death of his mother. And through a series of circumstances, he ended up traveling to the land of the dead. And the story ultimately became about him trying to find his mother in the land of the dead. And then that story ended with the catharsis of him finally letting go of her and being able to move on. And we worked on that for many, many months. I'd say maybe 8 months. We were developing that storyline. And it finally hit me one day, the more research that I did into, the true meaning of Dia de Muertos, and we had traveled to Mexico and done a lot of research, I started to realize that the story that we were telling was a very Western story, and it was kind of thematically antithetical to what Dia de Muertos is all about. Dia de Muertos is about never letting go, right? And so I made the very difficult decision at that point to scrap just about everything that we had done, other than, some exploration into what a land of the dead might look like. And we started from scratch again with the seeds of what ultimately became Coco. And that wasn't the first big change. I mean, there was a long stretch of time where Coco was meant to be a full-blown musical, like break out into song, traditional musical. And we wrote, maybe 6 or 7 different songs even for the film. And I then had another epiphany that we were trying to force Coco to be something different than what it wanted to be. So it's important you can't necessarily just decide at the beginning of your journey what the end product is going to be. You need to listen to it along the way and trust that sometimes it tells you what it wants to be. And it was at that point in the process that we scrapped it being a full-blown musical and instead made it a film that fully embraced music and had music in its DNA, but it wasn't, a traditional break into song musical. It had people performing songs and music in the film, but they didn't just spontaneously break out into song. So those were 2 pretty major changes, kind of pivot points that we went through in making Coco.
Thank you very much.
And I must say that Lee and I, we met in a festival in Mexico, and that was in Pixar, the year that Coco came out. And they did this beautiful, with flowers, the
cempasúchil
tree. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I must say, I don't know if you would say, but I must say that Mexicans were crazy about this film. They absolutely adore it. They absolutely loved it because the soul, it was very much there on Day of the Dead, and all this amazing work that you did on the research and also on trying to make a true story. So
Yeah, that was ultimately amazingly rewarding to me because we did work so hard to have the film be culturally accurate and respectful. It was a mandate we had from the very beginning on this project. And so to have the film be as embraced as it was in Mexico and among the Mexican American community was incredibly rewarding and gratifying to me because there was never any guarantee that it would. I mean, we had kind of had the odds stacked against us in a way because we were making the film in America. I'm white, I'm not Latino. And anyway, we knew there was the potential for a lot of criticism if we hadn't gotten the film right. So we really worked very, very hard and surrounded ourselves with cultural advisors and made a lot of trips down to Mexico and really tried to immerse ourselves in that world and bring everything that we experienced and learned and put it into the film.
It shows. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll bring in Julia Dumanjo. She is speaking on behalf of the 2D students, and they have questions as well. So, Julia.
Okay. Hi. So,
Hi.
as I said, we are studying 2D animation, and we'd like to know if is there any room for 2D animators at Pixar, you know, as a 3D studio, and what does a 2D animator need to do to work at Pixar?
Sure. Great question. You know, we have a lot of animators at Pixar that not only do 3D animation, but also have strong backgrounds in 2D animation. And there are a lot of different ways that those skills can be called upon. You know, on Coco, for instance, the whole title sequence, the opening of the film where we have the animated papel picado, the cut paper flags that are kind of telling the story of Miguel's family and his past, that was all animated in 2D. And then, you know, kind of utilized and mapped onto these 3D forms to create the flags that were alive. But all the actual animation on the flags was done in 2D. We've done a lot of title sequences for the films that have utilized 2D animation. We are just now starting to do shorts even that use 2D animation. We have this whole Sparks program at Pixar that allow people that haven't had opportunities otherwise to make films to make a film. And you know, we just had a film recently, a short film called Burrow, which was attached to the front of Soul, our newest feature, and that was done completely 2D. So even though Pixar was started as a 3D animation studio and is primarily a 3D animation studio, there are certainly opportunities for people who know 2D animation. Now, that being said, I don't know of any instances where there are any animators that only know 2D animation. There are animators that love 2D animation and are great at it, but they also can do the 3D animation that we do. And so they kind of jump around and work on different kinds of projects as needed. In the case of Burrow, that the woman who directed that film wasn't even an animator. She was a story artist. She was a storyboard artist, and she was actually one of my story artists on Coco. And then she made this beautiful 2D film. And we had another film called Kit Bull that was directed by a woman named Rosie, who also was a storyboard artist on Coco with me. And I believe that was all done totally 2D.
Thank you. Now we have another student from another 2D students group, Neil Villagrasa, and he has a question about script writing, I think. Neil?
Yes. Many of your most successful films have in common that they have a trip, a journey where the characters not only metaphorically but physically, not only metaphorically but literally, they go on a journey and they encounter challenges in their way. Is this a coincidence, or do you feel comfortable with this type of storytelling? If so, is there a personal reason for it?
No, I mean, it's not like we have some rule that we have to have stories that have some kind of journey or trip in them. I think that, you know, anytime you're trying to tell a story with kind of characters experiencing new things and you know, kind of testing their fortitude and having them go on some kind of emotional journey, that lends itself to going on a literal journey as well. But again, we never set out to say, oh, they have to go on some kind of journey in this film. I'd like to think that we could make a very simple film that is purely an internal journey. You know, if it was engaging enough and you know, had a lot of visual potential, I think there would be a way to do that. But again, it's not any kind of, you know, rule that we have. I mean, I don't know. Is Toy Story a journey film? I don't know that I would call any of the Toy Story films that, other than maybe just the journey of getting home to Andy's house. I mean, I guess from a toy's perspective, that's a journey, even if it's just a few blocks.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go for the stop motion students. Daniel Hidalgo has a question.
Hi, so this is in relation with, well, a little bit in relation with the one of the questions, but we would like to know if you have ever considered making a movie in some other technique than 3D animation.
Are you talking about me personally or
Yeah.
at Pixar?
Yeah, you personally, yeah.
I love stop motion. I don't have any experience in it at all. I mean, I'm not even an animator, so it's always funny to find myself talking to animation students now because that wasn't my training. Although you could argue that I had 25 years of training at Pixar. It just wasn't while I was at school. So I love stop motion. I'm fascinated by it. Over the years, I've tried to take advantage of opportunities to visit studios that are doing stop motion. I visited the set of James and the Giant Peach back when it was being made. And I also visited the set of Henry Selick's other more recent film that ended up not being made, unfortunately. But it's always fascinating for me to see physical things being made because we do much the same in 3D, of course, but it's all virtual. You don't have that tactile, that opportunity to actually touch and create physically what you're creating visually on screen. So I am fascinated by it. I just don't have any experience with it. I think I would be capable of telling a story in that medium. I mean, you look at Wes Anderson, he had no background in animation and he's made 2 stop motion films, or directed them anyway. But I also know from talking to people who worked on those films that he very much was not hands-on with the making of the films. I mean, a lot of it was done virtually. He directed much in the same way I would, by just watching the finished shots or shots in progress and being able to comment on them and, have an opinion about how the shots were serving the storytelling. At the end of the day, I kind of feel like, a storyteller is a storyteller and a filmmaker is a filmmaker, and it really kind of doesn't matter what medium you're working in, whether it's live action or animation, or then even different mediums within animation, whether you're doing 3D or 2D drawn or stop motion. A story is a story, and how you're realizing that shouldn't matter. I mean, obviously you want to follow your passion of what interests you, and what the kinds of things that you like to see. But I don't think that a medium should be a barrier to any filmmaker or storyteller.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Lee. Now that you mentioned the live action animation, you started out as editor, and a live action editor has usually different takes of one same shot to choose from. And usually it's not the case in animation, at least in series. I don't know if at Pixar you tried different takes of one same shot, or we were curious about how an editor works in a animation feature. Do you work with the storyboarder beforehand? Do you discuss a lot with the storyboarder? How do you do that? How do you work as an editor in animation?
Sure. Well, hopefully a lot of your animation students have experience with the idea of editing in animation, whether it's editing storyboards, story reels, or then working with layout, dialogue editing, all of that. Hopefully they have some degree of experience with that. It's all the same if you're making a feature film. It's just, on a much larger scale and a much longer time scale. The editor is always central to any filmmaking. And I think it's the most important job next to the director, personally. And in animation, the editors tend to have even more control over the finished product than an editor would have in live action. I mean, there's some fundamental differences, of course, because in live action, the editor is really just responding to what he or she is given, what was shot on the set. And it's their job to kind of sift through all of this material and try to put it together in the most engaging way. But they are limited by what they have, what they've been given. But that can be exciting because an editor can take bad footage and create something wonderful out of it. But conversely, an editor can take something good and ruin it. In animation, the editor, at least my experience at Pixar, is that the editor is involved nearly from the very beginning, very early on in the story development process. The storyboarding process is really just an extension of the writing process, at least initially. And the editor is right there with the storyboard artists, helping to shape the film. Helping to guide the storytelling, helping to guide the writing. And then later on, when you start recording actors, their voices, the editor has a lot of work on their hands to cut that performance together in a believable way, to take all these little bits and pieces of dialogue and shape them into something that's really effective. And then beyond that, the editor is involved further down the pipe stream, in the process, when you start laying out the film and doing all the camera work and finding all the different angles and how the camera's moving and how all that's going to cut together. It's just an ongoing process. I've always seen the editor as being like the hub at the middle of the wheel. If you're to think of an animation, an animated feature production as being a big wheel with spokes going off to all these different departments, the editor sits squarely at the middle of that because they're really responsible for taking all of these disparate elements, whether it's visual, music, sound, dialogue, all of those things, and putting them together into an effective movie.
Thank you. Yes, we'll go again with the second year students, and Juan has more questions.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
Okay, so we are curious about, like, when you are creating a character, how do you come up with their information? I don't really mean the detailed designing, but their backgrounds, personalities, relationships, etc.
I can't give you a simple answer to that, because every story is different and every character is different, and the journey that you go on as a storyteller with that character. It helps to have there be some central conflict right out of the gate for that character. So in the case of Miguel in Coco, we had a kid who loved music and idolized a musician, but he lived in a family that disallowed music. So just that on its face is a ripe situation for conflict and secrets and all kinds of things. And because when we watch a movie, you never want to know what's going to happen. You want to be surprised by things that happen, and you want to see characters making choices throughout the film that are sometimes good choices that you agree with, but maybe sometimes are choices you don't necessarily agree with. And that's all part of what's fun about watching a movie. And it's all those things that get you engaged with the character and with the story that make you want to follow it through, and then hopefully feel something at the end of the film, at the end of the story. What do? You put that first stake in the ground. So again, with Miguel, we knew we wanted a kid in that situation, but we didn't know much more about him. So you start inventing the family around him. Who are his parents? What are they like? Why do they have this rule in their family? How did that come about? How does that rule manifest itself in day-to-day life? You just start writing scenes and imagining moments and setting your character loose in those moments and seeing how they react and how they act. And that starts to shape who that character is. It's just an ongoing process. And then, of course, once you cast the voice, the person who's going to be playing that character, that ends up really informing the character in a lot of ways. So it's just an ongoing process. But I think it's really, really important to state the fact that you need to spend a lot of time getting to know your character. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean sitting and writing a bunch of fictitious backstory. I know a lot of screenwriting books talk about doing that. I've never really done that myself. I don't think it's a waste of time to do it, but I also think it can be a way to procrastinate and not actually start writing your actual piece. Because if you have an intriguing situation and an interesting character, all that stuff will start to emerge, and the things that you need, the aspects of their personality and their character that you need to tell your story will start to organically emerge. You just have to be ready to listen and pay attention to what's unfolding, and not, as I said earlier, not just think about the end product in mind, but go on that journey with your characters.
I see. And is it more like your story when you are building a story? Does the story, it's more like the story stick with the characters, or the characters stick with the story? For example, today you are making a film with a like little monsters, and you want to while building the story, and then you decide to have like more skills, like you can do this and that, so I can make a story like this, or you stick more with the character.
Mm-hmm. I'm having trouble hearing you a little bit, but I think I get the gist of what you were asking. I mean, again, there's no rule. Like, everything can change. You can start to change a character as you're developing your plot, but the plot can also start to change based upon the character that you've been creating. So, again, there's no set rule. For me personally, I've thought a lot about like why I'm drawn to certain characters, or why I'm kind of all in with them and care about them and care about their situation, because ultimately that's what's paramount with any story you're telling. And I think this idea of relatability is important. Like, is this character going through something that I can relate to? Or can I see a bit of a mirror being held up to my own life, even in some small way? And you also want to see a character making choices that, even if you don't agree with, you understand why they're making the choices. I think the worst thing to do is to just arbitrarily make your character do things or go through something without thinking about what they're thinking and whether and why they're making the choices that they're making. Because for me, as an audience member, that's when I start to disengage from films, when I feel like, oh, this is just stupid. Like, nobody would say something like that. Nobody would do this. Nobody would go down into the dark, creepy basement alone. Like, those kinds of things. I much prefer to see characters that are behaving in real ways, even if they're things that I don't understand. It could be a culture that I don't have any experience with or understand. But if I feel like I'm in capable hands of somebody who understands this world, then I can trust them to take my hand and guide me through the story. So I'm sorry I'm rambling a bit here, but I'm trying to get to the core of what you're asking about, I think, which is just about, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you come up with a character first, or do you come up with a story and then populate that story with characters? And I think it's a little of both, but character always has to win out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Juan. Now we'll go again with Alejandro from 3D.
Mr. Unkrich, could you tell us about the symbology of colors in Coco? Why are the orange and blue the predominant colors of the movie?
Sure. I learned a lot about color design from my art director on Toy Story 3, who's Dice Tsutsumi. He used to work at Blue Sky, and then I brought him to Pixar to work on Toy Story 3. He is just brilliant with color, and he does very, very in-depth analyses of color throughout films, and then makes choices for the films that he's working on that kind of try to structure that use of color. And most of the time, it's stuff that audiences will never think about, but I think it's important to think about for the filmmaker. I mean, the director doesn't need to necessarily work all this out, but they need to be on board with ideas that the art directors or the production designers have. And not only think about how color is used, but then map how color is used throughout the course of the story. So, I mean, many of you may know that we always do what are called color scripts for our films, where we kind of map out what colors are predominant throughout the arc of the story that we're telling. And, it sounds like it could be a little pedantic working that way, but and we do stray from it at times, but it's good to have a framework, a skeleton there structurally. On Toy Story 3, blue was a very important color. Blue for us represented Andy, it represented home, and we pulled that blue from the wallpaper in Andy's bedroom. And then we started making a lot of choices that, Andy's wardrobe is primarily blue. His car is blue. There's a lot of use of blue in that film that represents home and safety. On Coco, color worked in a couple of ways. One, I wanted to make sure that when we went to the land of the dead, that it was very impactful. Obviously, the best use of that idea is Dorothy going to Oz in The Wizard of Oz. And in that case, they went from a pretty much black and white or sepia toned world into a full blown Technicolor world when Dorothy arrived in Oz. And I wanted a similar kind of feeling in Coco, but I didn't want to just copy The Wizard of Oz and have the beginning and end of the film be in black and white. So we talked a lot about how to restrict the use of color at the beginning and end of the film, especially really saturated colors, so that when we went to the land of the dead, it would have more impact. And then even beyond that, we tried not to use certain colors. There are a lot of kind of purples and magentas and fuchsias that we use in the land of the dead that we really don't see all that much in the land of the living. Now, a big challenge for us is that even when we're not in the land of the dead yet, we were telling a story about a culture celebrating Dia de los Muertos, which is a celebration that's full of color. So we ended up embracing color, especially orange. You were asking about orange, because orange is a real predominant color in the celebration of this holiday. And it comes mostly from the marigold flowers, or cempasúchil, as they're called there, which are used for all parts of the celebration, from adorning the ofrendas, the altars, to sprinkling the petals to make paths for the loved ones to follow when they're coming home. That orange is just a big part of the celebration, and so we knew we needed to have that orange be a big part of the beginning and at the end of the film. But it also drove decisions like having the bridge to the land of the dead be made out of those orange flower petals, and having the flower petal that Miguel holds whenever he's about to get sent back home, have that be a bright orange. I don't know about blue in that film. I don't know that I ever thought about the color blue all that much in Coco. For me, in my mind, it was mostly about the really rich saturated orange used at the beginning and end of the film, and then going for those purples and maybe even some blues and pinks in the land of the dead.
So the orange is some kind of nexus between the land of the dead and the land of the living. That would be the thing. Well,
the orange definitely crosses over between the two worlds. Certainly, that's the one color that is predominant throughout the film. But again, every story is, you have your unique challenges, and you try to navigate your way through and figure out how you can have some kind of structure to what you're doing.
Very interesting. Thank you. Now we'll go back to the students. They have a couple of questions on script writing, so maybe you can put them together, Julia.
Yes, our question was, what do you think is the most important quality on a script writer, and what does a script writer need to do to become a part of the Pixar family, as writing films?
Mm-hmm. Well, what's important for a screenwriter? Yeah, that's another big question. Well, you have to be able to write, and that doesn't mean you need to be able to write while you're in film school. This is when you're learning. You know, there are a lot of little things that are ultimately important, a lot of things that I've talked about already in terms of character development. I personally think it's important to have a goal in mind, have an ending to your story. That's not always possible. There are plenty of movies and novels that have been written where the author did not know how everything was going to end. I wouldn't and couldn't work that way. I need to know what I'm painting towards. So I think it behooves you as a writer to really think long and hard about what the ideal ending to the story that you're telling would be, because once you land on that ending, your job becomes not easy, but becomes easier in terms of knowing what you're heading towards, what you're painting towards. On both Toy Story 3 and Coco, I knew how the films were going to end. Toy Story 3, I knew that Andy was going to give his toys away to a little girl at the end of the movie. And on Coco, we knew that Miguel was going to come home and sing to his Mama Coco, and that the song that he sang was going to kind of temporarily unlock her memories. So those were two things that we knew. And so it was like holding a hand while we were making the film, that we knew that that's where everything was going. A lot of things could change out from under us, and we could change the order of scenes. Characters would come and go, but ultimately we knew that that's what we were painting towards. Now, to get back to your core question, there's obviously so much that's important with any screenwriting. You want to have unique voices for your characters. They should sound like fully formed lives speaking. It's great to have your characters be distinct from each other. I mean, I've read a lot of bad writing where it just sounds like the same person speaking out of every character's mouth. Here's another thing that I wasn't taught so much when I was going through my schooling is just that adage that writing is rewriting. Like, nobody just writes something and then publishes it or has it made into a movie. It's a long process of evaluating and taking criticism and listening to people and getting advice and thinking endlessly about the story that you're telling and being prepared to throw things away that you at one time thought were really good and were vital to the story you were telling. You have to be prepared to kill anything at a moment's notice if it's the right thing to do for the story writ large. And that's a hard thing to learn. I have a teenage son myself, and he's been having to do kind of longer form writing recently. And he wants to do what I kind of did growing up, which is just write a paper and turn it in. And he doesn't want to kind of go back and look at it and think about how it can be better. But if you're going to be writing, professionally for film or novels or whatever it is, you have to be prepared to spend most of your time rewriting, which is why it's important to not spend forever planning on your writing, but to just get something written, because the sooner you have something written, the sooner you have a complete screenplay. Now you can really get to work and do the important work of rewriting, which is going to be the bulk of your challenge. And then in terms of writing for Pixar, again, there's no rule about how people end up writing at Pixar. I mean, some of the directors write themselves, like Andrew Stanton and Brad Bird. And then there are directors like me that collaborate with other writers. We don't really have in-house writers, although a little bit lately we've had some people that have really loved being at Pixar, and so they stuck around and helped on multiple films. But usually we find writers the same way anyone would find a writer for a film, live action or otherwise, which is that we read scripts. We have a development department that reaches out to agencies, and that's how I found the writer that I worked with on Toy Story 3. And that's how I found the writer that I initially worked with on Coco. Ultimately, those writing duties were taken over by my co-director, Adrian Molina, because he kind of has shown that he has a talent for screenwriting, even though that's not anything he ever studied. Just through his own work on a few films, writing a bit here and there, I started to see that he was actually really good as or better than professional writers that I had worked with. So, you just never know where opportunities are going to come from, but at the end of the day, you just need to have the skills. You need to be able to do the work. You need to be able to write. You need to be able to move closer and closer to the goalposts consistently and on a schedule. Because when you're writing professionally, you have deadlines, and you have to bring the goods. And so, that just comes from writing and experience. I'll just throw out one last thing, which is I had a friend in film school who wanted to be a writer, and his writing was terrible. I mean, I could never really tell him because it was terrible. He just was not a good writer. But man, he was just dead set on being a writer. And I watched him over the years just plug away and write and not get anything made. But then one day, you know what? He got an agent, and then he kept writing and he kept pitching. And then he started getting pitches bought. And then before you knew it, wasn't fast, took many years, but he was writing and having films made from his writing, and his writing had gotten a lot better. Because like anything, I mean, there are people that can play the piano when they're 2 years old, and they're brilliant, they're prodigies, they were born to do that. But there are also people that are amazing pianists who learned through brute force, through consistency, and just doing the work and practicing. And the same is true of can be true of writing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. Now we'll go with the stop motion students again. And Daniel has another question on behalf of the group. Daniel?
So we would like to know which project has presented you more setbacks or obstacles?
It's presented me more what?
Setbacks or obstacles.
Oh, obstacles. Well, every film has its obstacles. Sometimes they're technical. When we made Finding Nemo, that was an enormous challenge to just figure out visually how to create an underwater world. So that took a lot of research and development and testing. And then there's stories that are just difficult to crack. Luckily, on both of the films I directed, on Toy Story 3 and Coco, they were relatively smooth processes. But I say relatively because I'm just comparing them to other like near disasters that I've also worked on. I don't care how many times you make a film or how many Oscars you've won or anything. Anytime you set out on a new project, it's a lot of it is just as difficult. I mean, the core of it, the storytelling, doesn't get any easier. Maybe it gets a little faster because you've made a lot of mistakes in your past and some pitfalls to avoid, but the summoning of ideas when the ideas aren't coming to you, that doesn't get any easier. I talked a lot about Coco at the beginning of this conversation about the big changes that it went through. So that was certainly challenging, and there were times where I really didn't know what I was doing, where the story wasn't coming together, and I would drive into work being completely stressed out and feeling like I was failing my crew. These are all normal things that you don't hear filmmakers talk about a lot, but I promise you they're all going through it, no matter how many films they've made. It just does not get any easier. Hopefully it remains fun. Filmmaking can be really fun, but it's also, it's not something for the weak. You have to have a strong fortitude, and you have to have a lot of drive and passion to get through it, because you are going to have obstacles thrown at you every single day. And you have to be able to find a way to kind of forge ahead and make decisions. So yeah, those were big obstacles on Coco. On Toy Story 3, I would say probably the biggest challenge, the biggest obstacle in that film is that we had already made 2 really good Toy Story movies, and we were trying to make a third, and there was no guarantee that it would be any good. We'd spent so much time on the first 2 films thinking deeply about the characters and their journeys and what they needed to go through. And we had them go through those journeys on those films. So, you get to a point where you're like, well, what more do they have to go through? That becomes the challenge, because you don't just want to have a banal story with a bunch of wisecracking toys going through it. You want to be saying something deeper, and you want the toys to be on some kind of emotional journey. So, and you also don't want to repeat yourself, and cover ground that you've already covered in the previous film. So making sequels in a way can be easier because you already have a look and feel and a tone for the film, and you have many characters. But the storytelling itself can become much more difficult because of what I just talked about.
Okay, thank you. We don't have much time left, so let me go back to Alejandro, because you have still some questions and they're interesting. So,
Yeah, we would like to ask you if you can tell us about some of the reference points you used to, your crew used to animate the toys in Toy Story. Did you explore the movements of objects from real life?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tenet of animation, right? Is kind of truth in materials and weight and all of those things. So in the case of Toy Story, we were dealing with characters that were based upon, in many cases, real world objects and people knew how they moved physically. And so we needed to study them to make sure that we had their weight right, and we took advantage of kind of particular unique things about them, like Mr. Potato Head's facial features falling out all the time. In the case of Woody, now there's Woody dolls everywhere in the world, but when we made Toy Story, there were no Woody. We couldn't go to the store and buy a Woody doll and see how it moved. So we had to kind of make one. And so we took a toy head that was similar in, like a vinyl toy head, and we sewed it onto a ragdoll stuffed body, and started to play with it and think about how we wanted Woody to move and how we wanted him to be kind of loose and floppy versus Buzz, who's much more rigid because he's made out of hard plastic with specific points at which his joints move. So that was kind of easy in a way, because we could just go to the toy store with the company credit card and just buy a bunch of toys and play with them and start to think about how they would move and how that movement might indicate what kind of character they were. But in the case of, say, skeletons and Coco, that was all new to us. I mean, there had certainly been skeletons in the history of animation before, but we wanted to do something that was new, that didn't feel like what we'd seen before, while still respecting the heritage of skeletons in animation. It was a huge challenge for us, actually, on Coco, because a lot of skeletons that I'd seen in films before, most of them don't have eyes, don't have eyeballs. And sometimes they're just kind of all loose and wiggly and bendy, which wouldn't work for our world because everything looks so kind of realistic that we needed to have the integrity of bone. But at the same time, we didn't want that integrity to limit us too much. We needed the skeletons to still move in entertaining ways. We needed them to have a range of facial expressions. I made the choice early on to give the skeletons eyeballs, because when you're watching a film, you're spending most of your time looking at that character's eyes, whether it's animation or live action. That if you were to do like a heat map of where the audience is looking while a shot's on screen, let's see if I get my fingers right here. You're opposite. Most of the time, it's going to be like right around in here. The character, the audience is going to be looking at the character's eyes. And so I was very concerned that if the skeleton characters didn't have eyes, that the audience would not be able to connect with them on an emotional level. So does it make sense that they have eyes? No. But I just figured if I made skeletons with eyes, the audience would maybe, when they first saw them, go, "Oh, that's weird. They have eyes. Okay, they have eyes." And then that's it. They go off and watch the rest of the story. I actually had a talk that I used to give on Coco, and I took a shot from the film where Hector is talking to Miguel down in the cenote, and it's a very emotional scene. And I rendered it twice, one the way it is in the film with his eyes, and then one where we turned off the eyes. So he's saying all the same things. He's acting beautifully. The animation is lovely, but there are no eyes. And I'll tell you, the two don't compare. In our case, it was vital that we give the skeletons eyes, and that we figure out a way to, have their jaw connected. And, we struggled for a long time to figure out how to give them some form of lips. We don't want to just give them lips. We needed to find something that still felt skull-like, but, we didn't want characters like looking like this through the whole film, right? It's like, how do you do sad? You have to have a range of expression, or we felt that way anyway. Especially because we knew we were ultimately telling a very emotional story where characters, even though they happened to be skeletons, they were still kind of living, breathing, had rich inner lives, and we needed to be able to express that through their acting.
Very interesting. Yeah. We have we're running out of time, so can I ask you a couple of questions that I know many of the students are interested in? One is what makes a reel from an animator stand out from all the others? And the other one is what would be your top tip for anyone trying to break into the animation industry?
In terms of reels, I don't know that I'm the best person to ask that, because I'm not part of that process of looking at animator reels. I've seen a lot of animator reels, but it's our animators who evaluate animation reels when they're looking at people to hire. I do know that they're looking for fundamentals, of course, how animators are using weight and expressing weight, subtlety of acting. It doesn't even necessarily have to be super polished. I mean, you can express things in a kind of a unique, interesting way, effective way, even with blocking, stuff that's not like finished animation. So again, I don't want to say too much on this because I don't consider myself an expert on it, but I mean, I will say if I were sitting and looking at an animation reel, I would be looking for a unique voice. Seeing something that wasn't something I would see in a million other reels. I would be looking for a sense of soul in the characters. When I'm directing animators, I almost never get into the weeds of, specifically telling them how to move the characters or the arc of a movement or anything technical. I'm always talking to them as if they're actors, because they are tasked with bringing the characters alive and giving them souls. So if in your reels, you have examples of animated characters that seem to really have an inner life and all the conflict that can happen, inside a character, those are the kinds of things I think that are going to stand out. And then in terms of how to get started, that, it depends on what you're wanting to do. I would say it's important for you to, at this point in your lives, to start to figure out what you're passionate about, and that's not always necessarily what you want to do. Mm-hmm. You need to figure out what you're passionate about. What are the things that you could just do 24 hours a day and be happy? And then get really good at that. Get really, really good at that. Because when you get opportunities, they're not always going to come from your abilities or your talent. They can come from anywhere. I mean, when I got hired at Pixar, it had nothing to do with my skill level at all. It was that I knew how to use the Avid, this nonlinear digital editing system that was pretty new at the time. I knew how to use it, and they wanted to make Toy Story using the system. And so I was on a list of people who knew it well, and that's why I got the call. So it had nothing to do with any of my abilities creatively. But once I was there, I was able to start doing what I do and what I knew how to do. And I knew I was a really good editor, and I knew that I could bring a lot to these films to help elevate them. And so I did that, and it was recognized, and people started putting more and more trust in me, and giving me more opportunities as time went on. I like to say, try to be, when you get a job, because I can't tell you how to get a job. They can come from any number of ways. You can get a job through nepotism. You can get a job through luck. You can get a job. There's no easy way to tell you how to get a job. The important thing is once you get the opportunity is to make yourself invaluable to the people that you're working for. Like be that one person who they would hate to lose because you're so valuable to them. And that opportunity will come from that. Opportunities maybe within the company you're working at, or maybe opportunities beyond that. But never stop learning. Never stop trying to make yourself better. There's no finish line. I mean, I've won a couple of Oscars, but oh my God, I feel like I have so much to learn and so many different things that I'd like to do. You just follow your passions. And I hope you can find your passion. Some people never find their passions, and that's sad, but try to find your passion and then pursue it. That's maybe the best advice I can give you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think Carolina had a question as well.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Lee. A couple of years ago, you left the company, you left Pixar to spend more time with Laura, Hannah, Alice, and Matt, your family, and also to pursue a personal project. Actually, I read that when you were 12, you saw The Shining by Stanley Kubrick, the amazing film, and you were so impressed by this film that up to date, it's something that is a big influence on you.
Yes.
And actually, also, I read that you are undertaking a big job of writing a book. Is that about The Shining?
Yes. Yeah. I've been. The Shining's been had a big impact on me, and it was the film that got me interested in wanting to make films myself. I've been kind of unhealthily obsessed with it since I was 12. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about why that is. But at the end of the day, it's a film, and Kubrick is a filmmaker that just has had a big impact on me creatively. So yes, for just over 10 years now, I've been working on kind of a definitive book on the making of The Shining. And it's taken so long for a lot of reasons. One, I've been making films myself, so I haven't had time to work on it full time until the last couple of years. But also it took me a long time to just track people down who worked on the film and get them to agree to talk to me. So that's been a long process, but the book will be coming out at the end of this year. It'll be published by Taschen, the art house publisher. They've done a number of other really beautiful books on Stanley Kubrick, some of Stanley Kubrick's films like 2001. And they had a book on a film he never made, Napoleon. So Taschen's going to be publishing this book, and I've been working a long time on it, and it's going to be fantastic, I think, for anyone who's a fan of the film or a fan of Stanley Kubrick. And it's been a fun diversion for me. It's been a fun thing for me to work on during the pandemic, especially because I can just focus on it and not feel like I'm avoiding, some film I should be making. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's been a good use of my time during the lockdown.
Well, we really hope that we can buy this film and that we can have you also in Spain sometime.
I'd love to come back. I've enjoyed time that I've spent in Spain. I'd like to be anywhere these days, to be honest with you. I'd like to be able to just get on a plane and go anywhere in the world. But yes, I would absolutely love to come back to Spain.
Well, actually, another artist from Pixar, I think you work together, will be also physically in Animac this year.
Who's that?
Daniel Lopez Munoz.
Oh, good. Yeah, he's a great character designer. Yeah, an artist. Yeah, good. Yeah, say hi to him for me.
Okay, we will. He's living in Barcelona right now, and he's in Lleida, where the festival takes place. He'll be there with us.
Cool.
So maybe we can see our students in the different rooms they are, so that they can wave you goodbye and thank you.
Yeah. Can we?
Thank you. Let me check with the editing.
Yeah, here we are.
Thanks. It was great talking to all of you, and stay safe. It looks like you're all staying safe or doing your best Me too. I know this is a really hard time. I have
Thank you so much.
thank you. I have 2 daughters in college, and it's not a fun time to be trying to be a student. But all I can say is hang in there. Things will get better. Stay safe, and good luck with whatever your passions may be.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.